Even though the South African economy generated better than expected returns in the second quarter of 2019, the economic pressure felt across all sectors of the local economy has now become more relevant than ever. I've invited Chief Economist of the Efficient Group, Mr. Dawie Rood, for some perspective. Welcome, Dawie.
Hello, Luciano.
Dawie, the numbers are simply not stacking up. I mean, where are we in the current economy? What is our current status?
Yeah. Well, the second quarter's economic growth numbers was at 3.1%, certainly better than expected. Most economists expected slightly lower economic growth. Most economists expected growth. And the reason for that is because of the first quarter's numbers. Remember, economic growth is calculated in a certain manner, and the most important reason why we saw better than expected numbers in the second quarter is simply because the first quarter was so weak. It's a quarter-on-quarter number, remember that. So there's a technical reason behind, or very important technical reason behind, the good performance in the second quarter of this year. In fact, if you compare the first 6 months of this year to the first 6 months last year, total economic growth currently is below 1%. And expectations for this year is still for the economy to expand at a rate of significantly less than 1%. So although the second quarter may look a little bit better than expected, we're certainly not out of the woods yet, and the South African economy is still under tremendous pressure and likely to remain so for the foreseeable future.
What role, given the perspective that you've given, what role does state-owned enterprises and the debt level and relative to those enterprises, together with government spending holistically, play? I mean, what impact does that have?
Yeah, one of the most important issues in the South African economy is one of the biggest obstacles and one of the biggest questions in South Africa at the moment is certainly what we're going to do with this mountain of state debt. What we've seen the last couple of decades, but especially the past 10 years or so, a dramatic increase in state spending. The revenue simply was not there, and in the process, state debt levels reach record levels today, and it has become totally unsustainable. And I'm talking only about the national state debt levels. I'm talking about what the Minister of Finance is responsible for. Additionally to that, the state-owned enterprises have been run into the ground financially as well, and they belong to the state. And that means that the debt of the state-owned enterprises is also part of state debt. And in the case of Eskom, as one example, the outstanding debt of Eskom is currently running in a region of about 500 billion rand. We're talking about massive amounts of money here. And that means that the state, including the state-owned enterprises, has become completely financially unsustainable. And in these sort of circumstances, you have to make a few choices, and very difficult choices. You have to cut back on state spending, which is politically extremely difficult to do. We have to get rid of nearly 30,000 people working at Eskom today, as an example. Or we have to cut back on the other civil servants, or we have to reduce their salaries. And I can assure you, organized labor is not going to be very kind to you if you propose that. In fact, we've seen that already. The other alternative will be simply to increase taxes, because the state needs more money. And I'm afraid the South African economy is just not strong enough to support further increases on various taxes. And that basically leaves you with one last alternative, and that is prescribed assets.
So prescribed assets has become a very hot topic. I get emails and phone calls on a daily basis with clients being extremely nervous, and rightly so. They can be nervous. I mean, people accumulate wealth, hard-earned wealth over a number of years. Forcing an investor to invest in a guaranteed loss, surely that must have some sort of property rights implication.
I think people are nervous, and rightfully so, you're absolutely correct, but I don't think people should start panicking. Let's just unpack this and understand this. Prescribed assets is part of the manifesto of the ANC. So certainly the ANC is the government, so to speak, but it's not officially part of government policy yet. And there's not legislation, at least not as far as most political commentators are expecting at this stage. So the process of changing the law to force people or pension funds to invest in certain prescribed assets, that has not yet started. But certainly, I expect that to eventually happen, and eventually we will have legislation where there's a lot of water that still has to run into the sea before we actually get to that. That will include things or questions like, for example, which kind of prescribed assets will be prescribed? Will it be applicable on all kinds of funds? What are the extent of these sort of prescribed assets and questions like that? And of course, there are questions about whether this will be constitutionally valid as well. So there are many questions, and a lot of things still need to happen before it becomes reality. I think under these sort of circumstances, certainly be worried, but do not panic. And the most important thing I think that individuals can do is make sure that you have a good financial advisor to assist you to make sure that you are in a position to make certain amendments to your financial plans if it becomes necessary. So don't panic yet. This is something to be concerned about. I believe it is going to become reality sometime in the future, but we are not there yet. In the meantime, you certainly do have time to get a good financial advisor to make sure all your matters are properly in place.
It is indeed interesting times that we're experiencing. We have seen volatile times historically. Thank you for trusting us with the management and the navigation of your wealth during these times, and rest assured that we're doing our utmost best to navigate these stormy weathers. Speak to you soon.